Hello. This presentation is going to go over one of the most controversial developments in modern warfare, which is the outsourcing of military force to private companies. My name is Christian. I spent almost 10 years in the military, and I have some experience, knowledge, and friends in relation to private military contractors. And Zach.
Hello, I am Zachariah. I am his little brother, and I have been watching the war in Ukraine since its start, and I will be continuing to do that until its ultimate conclusion.
Yeah, we both follow military things and basically all the happenings of the war pretty pretty accurately and consistently. Today we're going to talk about how private military companies have emerged and how Blackwater and um, Wagner and other PMC companies have operated in the modern era, and what moral and legal dilemmas that this raises. And we're also spitballing this. We have no script. We're just kind of shooting from the hip. So if there's any mistakes, forgive us or don't. It is what it is. All right. First slide. So a brief explanation of PMCs and their use. PMCs are known as private military companies or contractors, sorry, and they're private businesses that provide soldiers for hire to act as a variety of roles. Could be security, logistical support, and they listen to basically whoever pays them. It could be government or politicians or a different country, technically. By doing this, it allows those entities that would purchase these services to subvert international and domestic laws and opinions. Um, PMCs allow governments to project power in place of their traditional military when these contractors go to deployment zones or wherever they're needed or wanted. These contractors do not wear the flag of their country or the uniform or give any indication of who their buyer is, and this offers a kind of, well, it wasn't my army, kind of flexibility and political deniability. But this privatization of violence can also create controversies. What rules or laws do the PMCs follow? Who is accountable when the contractors end up killing or committing crimes, whether it's on accident or on purpose? If no one is claiming uh, to have ownership of them and their actions? And what happens when they are killed or eventually misused by the entity who has contracted them? Um, sorry, go back. So a brief history about the PMCs too. They've been recorded as far back as I think 13th century English privateers, and back then they would use these England would use these privateers, which were just local merchants and local sailors, and they would give them letters of marque to go and conduct raids on the enemy and protect like shipping lanes instead of sending their actual navy, which allowed them a lot more flexibility than other nations had at that time. Um, the modern era PMCs only came around about the probably 1990s. I forget the name of the company. I think it was Executive Outcomes in Angola, and there's another company in Sierra Leone, Sandline International. But those aren't very well known about. When it really started to kick off was post 9/11 with the war in Iraq and Afghanistan, and this would change these companies into part of the American foreign diplomacy or foreign policy and force projection. So one of the most well-known PMC groups is Blackwater, and it was created in 1997 by an ex-Navy SEAL. And the initial goal was to be a training center for military and law enforcement officers. But after 9/11, they ended up getting contracted by a bunch of political donors, senators, mostly Republican, in order to provide like early stage security and work alongside like the CIA. At one point in Afghanistan, I think almost 70% or 60 something percent of all US forces in country were contractors. And then a good amount of those remaining 30% was CIA, and then a very small amount was actually the US military. During this time, they did. their missions included things like protecting diplomats, convoy escort, and basically assassinations. They also did kidnapping and interrogation. Sometimes questionable techniques were used, but that's a story for another time. um, because they were what do you call it? Sponsored by like major political donors, and they received a lot of funding. This shifted the company's overall purpose from basically being a elite training center to more just privatizing the war on terror. Um, and officially, like I said, their mission is to protect diplomats and U.S. officials that are in country, and do escorts and provide training for the local militias and the U.S. military, as well as the CIA. But unofficially, they were mostly just there for their, I think they called them targeted killing programs, which is the assassinations. Um, Kidnapping key targets or people suspected of being related to local militias or terrorists, and doing secret like prisoner transfers and like handoffs with the CIA. Um, but the issue with some PMCs, like we said before, is like what happens when things go wrong. Sometimes they did go pretty wrong, and at first it was, I think there's a numerous amount of controversies with Blackwater, where they got caught up with illegal weapon shipments and doing black market trading, I think, with some countries in Africa. And then after that, they were pretty well known for their like brutality and their like carelessness. And this resulted in one of their firefights kind of going bad, where I think four Blackwater guys got captured. And there's a documentary about it, but they were killed, mutilated, dragged through the streets, hung above the streets, above a bridge by a crane, and I'm pretty sure they were set on fire also, but don't quote me on that. And after that happened, in I think it was 2 or 3 years later, yeah, 2007 in Baghdad, they got caught in the aftermath of a fight, but it ended up just being them killing almost 40 civilians. And this started to go back to the dilemma about like who's responsible if they end up committing crimes, or if no one claims them, and should they actually be there, and should they be doing the work in place of the military. Um, yeah, it just seemed like after that they were known mostly for lack of accountability, seeming immunity to law, and just mindless aggression. Um, and they were given this kind of seniority too when they were sent to an overseas location. They would basically be given, the rank was GS-13, which in the military equivalent is an O5, which is like a mid-grade officer. So they outrank like 80% of the military, maybe 90%. I don't have the exact figures of the rank distribution at that time, but um, they were given basically very high seniority, sent into country on like diplomatic or fake passports by the U.S., and then they were given access to basically the same weapons that the military has, and even some more futuristic stuff. Like these guys were using drones and like surveillance technologies that weren't really publicly talked about or like actively used as early as like 2004, before it became pretty mainstream. Um, so yeah, in conclusion of this section, Blackwater was a privatized military, right? They're given basically immunity to do war and projected use of force on behalf of America at the early to mid stages of the war on terror. But this is not only a American issue, and with that, I'll pass this to Zach to talk about the Russian side.
Hello, once again, I'm Zach, and I'm going to talk about the Russian PMCs. There are a lot of different Russian PMCs, but the most famous one, the one I'm going to be talking about, is specifically the Wagner Group. Now, the Wagner Group is a very one of the oldest and also most well-known Russian PMCs. They operated in a lot of places in Syria during the civil war, I believe, with Bashar al-Assad, and they helped with, like the American PMCs would. They would be there to train the local Assad forces, pro-Assad forces. They would be there for um, to do combat missions as a more elite unit, and they also helped with smuggling equipment. Along with that, they also served in a lot of other countries, like in Mali and Burkina Faso. And I believe at some point they did also work in Sudan, and they were there to help with smuggling gold to Russia. Um, but don't quote me on that. Uh, Continuing on, the Russian PMCs during the Ukraine war. I don't know much about their actions during the 2014 war. Um, Russia did use um, legally distinct, technically not Russian troops during the war in the Donbass in order to basically say that they were not the ones fighting the Ukrainian forces in Luhansk and Donetsk, but they were smuggling weapons into that area. That's also where you have I believe, a Malaysian Airlines flight, which was shot down by, I believe, a separatist Russian air defense system. Going into the war in Ukraine, the larger war in Ukraine in 2022, the Russian PMCs were did mass recruiting, including and most importantly Wagner Group, and Wagner Group would go to prisons to recruit a lot of